Welcome to your next lesson on your wedding processional and recessional. Now, unless you've had a wedding or been in a wedding before, the words processional and recessional might confuse the hell out of you, but that's why I'm here. Let me break them down for you. The wedding processional refers to the formal entrance of the family and bridal party. The word is also used to refer to the piece of music played during these entrances. These special entrances include the family, like the parents, grandparents, and any other family or honored guests, your attendants being your bridesmaids and groomsmen, and any flower girls and or ring bearers, and the bride and whoever's walking her down the aisle. Now, your recessional refers to the formal exit of the bridal party, including the bride and groom and the bridesmaids and groomsmen, and it also refers to the piece of music played for this exit. In this lesson, we're going to talk about who's in charge. I'll show you the traditional processional and recessional order, as well as what to do if you decide to break tradition. So let's talk about who's in charge. First off, it's important to remember what the rehearsal is for. It's not for practicing the ceremony itself, but instead to practice walking in and walking out to make sure everyone knows where to stand. It's typically the responsibility of your wedding planner or your day of coordinator to cue each group and tell them when to start walking. However, if you don't have a wedding planner or a day of coordinator, you're going to want to ask a family member or a friend to help run the rehearsal and cue everyone for their entrance into the ceremony. And you will want to make sure this person can do the same at the actual wedding. So let's spend a few minutes going over the actual rehearsal order. In order to run through the ceremony's rehearsal, first you're going to want everyone to start by knowing where to stand. Then you'll read through the ceremony order, practice your recessional, practice your processional, the handoff of the bride, and then you'll repeat. So let me break this down for you one more step. First, start by knowing where to stand. Knowing where to stand is the first step. Instead of starting with the processional or the entrance, start by getting everyone into place where they will be standing during the ceremony. And as you can see here, this is what a traditional ceremony looks like. You have the bride on the left side, the groom on the right with his groomsmen, and the bridesmaids on her side, where you have the officiant, and then the bride's side, her friends and family, or the groom's side and his friends and family. But it doesn't have to be like that. You can have the seating mixed, or you can choose to have sides. So in a traditional ceremony, the parents of the groom usually kick off the proceedings. The groom's paternal grandparents enter first, followed by the groom's maternal grandparents. Then next comes the bride's paternal grandparents and then her maternal grandparents. And if one of the grandparents happens to be deceased, the single grandparent can walk down the aisle alone or can be escorted by a family member of the opposite sex who is not in the wedding. Then the groom's parents would walk down the aisle, and if the mother of the groom wants her son to escort her down the aisle, then his father will follow right behind. If the mother of the bride is not escorting her daughter down the aisle, she would follow the groom's parents next in the processional order. She can choose to walk alone down the aisle or have another male family member walk with her. The father of the bride may also escort his wife before returning to the back of the ceremony site to usher in his daughter. The mother of the bride's entrance signals that the processional is about to begin. Once she reaches the end of the aisle, she takes her seat to the left of the aisle in the first row. Another note here, if the bride and or groom have parents that are divorced and are making an entrance, the mother of the bride or groom will enter after the father of the bride or groom and the step parent. If the parents get along, they may choose to sit together. After the mother of the bride takes her seat, the groom will traditionally take his place at the head of the altar, coming in from the side of the venue. However, many couples these days choose to have the groom's parents escort him down the aisle, where then his parents would sit to the right of the aisle in the front row, followed by the groomsmen and the bridesmaids. And the groomsmen open the processional as they walk down the aisle one by one. If the guys are proceeding, and they don't have to, they can enter from the side of the ceremony instead, they would enter in the reverse order of how they would be standing during the ceremony. The best man would walk in last as he would be standing closest to the groom. Some couples also choose to have the groomsmen and bridesmaids walk down the aisle together, arm in arm. If you choose not to have your groomsmen and bridesmaids walk down the aisle together, then the officiant, the groomsman, the best man, they'd enter first, typically from the side of the ceremony site, but sometimes up the aisle depending on preference. And then the bridesmaids would make their way down the aisle one by one before the maid of or matron of honor. It's important to remember that the bridesmaids should hold their bouquets in front of them with both hands, and the groomsmen should decide on clasping their hands in the front or the back of their body. It's important everyone do the same thing. If everyone's doing something different, it looks awful in your wedding photos. The ring bearer and flower girl precede the bride down the aisle. Traditionally, the ring bearer carries the wedding rings, and the flower girl may carry a basket of petals to scatter as she walks down the aisle, leading the way for the bride. Once the ring bearers hands the rings to the best man and the flower girl reaches the front of the aisle, they will then either stand on the bride's side and the groom's side, or they'll sit with their parents, and that will signal that the bride's soon to be entering. And then the bride and her escort, which is typically her father, they should not enter until the entire wedding party has entered and is in place. Normally, there's a separate piece of music for the bride's processional, and the officiant will usually say, "If everyone will please rise," in order to invite your guests to stand. Now, once everyone is in their respective places, you'll want to read through the ceremony order. And look at the ceremony in draft and read through the headings aloud so everyone knows roughly the order of the ceremony. Don't read through the entire ceremony word for word or say the vows. You'll want to save that excitement for your big day. Make a note of any wedding ceremony readings, candle lightings, or sand ceremonies, and when the rings will need to be presented. Now, since everyone is already in place, you'll practice the recessional like the ceremony has just ended and you're walking out. Start with the kiss and or the presentation of the couple and exit in the proper order. The bride will take her bouquet from the maid of honor and exit with the groom. Typically, the wedding party will exit in pairs even if they entered separately, followed by the flower girl and ring bearer, and then the parents and grandparents. Remember to make sure that each couple that exits the ceremony leaves enough room between themselves and the couple in front of them, and it's best to leave at least 20 feet between each couple, or once the couple in front of them is halfway down the aisle. Once everyone has successfully exited the ceremony, then you'll want to practice walking in or the processional. Now that everyone knows where to stand when they enter the ceremony, practicing the entrance should be a breeze. First, you'll want to line everyone up in the order they will enter. The officiant, the groom, best man, and groomsmen enter first, typically from the side of the ceremony site, but sometimes up the aisle depending on preference. Following them are the grandparents, the parents of the groom, and the mother of the bride. Finally, the bridesmaid, maid of honor or matron of honor, and flower girls and ring bearers. You'll want to make sure that the wedding party enters about 20 to 30 feet apart, or when the person in front of them is halfway down the aisle. The last item to practice is what happens when the bride and her escort make it to the front of the ceremony and are standing in front of the officiant and the groom. If the escort is a parent of the bride, they should give her a kiss and congratulate her. The escort then typically shakes the groom's hand. The bride hands her bouquet to the maid of honor and steps forward next to the groom, and the escort moves to where they will be seated. The bride and groom should then be standing facing one another, holding hands in front of the officiant. At this point, the maid of honor can hand off both sets of flowers to one of the bridesmaids and fix the bride's train if necessary. Now that everyone is in place, practice walking back out and back in one more time to make sure everyone knows what to do, and then you're done. The rehearsal should not last more than 20 to 30 minutes at most. So, your traditional recessional order looks like this. First, the bride and groom, then the flower girl and ring bearer, the maid of honor and best man, the bridesmaids and groomsmen in pairs, the parents of the bride, the parents of the groom, the grandparents of the bride, the grandparents of the groom, the officiant, and then your wedding guests. Now, for a Jewish processional, the rabbi and our cantor would stand beneath the chuppah in the center. Then the grandparents of the bride walk down. They are seated in the first row on the right side. The grandparents of the groom are walked down and they're seated in the first row on the left side. Then the groomsmen come in pairs, the best man, the groom escorted by his parents with his father on his right and the mother on his left, the bridesmaid starting with the one who will be standing farthest from the bride, the maid or matron of honor, the ring bearer and or flower girl, and they can be seated with their parents once they reach the front, and then the bride escorted by her parents with her father on her right and her mother on her left. In a Jewish recessional, the bride and groom exit first, followed by the bride's parents, the groom's parents, the bride's grandparents, the groom's grandparents, the ring bearer and flower girl, the honor attendants, the maid of honor and best man, then the bridesmaids and groomsmen. The men now escort the women, followed by the rabbi and or cantor. Military weddings follow the same traditions as religious processionals. When it comes to the recessional, the only difference is that when the bride and groom walk down the aisle, they will do so under an arch of drawn swords. With LGBT weddings, many couples walk the aisle together or separate aisles and join each other at the altar. Your families can sit on your respective side and friends can sit on either side. You can both be standing up front when your guests arrive, or you can each be escorted down the aisle by your parents. Now, some current trends in wedding processionals and recessionals are grandmas as the flower girls, men on the bride's side and women on the groom's side, mixing of sexes on both sides, letting your guests sit on either side, and having smaller bridal parties. Now for some quick tips about your processional and recessional. First, if you're not religious, don't be afraid to forego tradition. Choose what is most comfortable for you and your future spouse. And another tip is that if you are in a space where the bride or the groom has to enter in a weird position or a weird space and you're adamant about not seeing them before they walk down the aisle, make sure that you stand at the front of the altar facing the officiant with your back towards your guests, so that when they start the processional music and the bride or groom makes their way down the aisle, you can see them for the first time then.